Joining us once again, Dr. Raywat Deonandan, an epidemiologist and science communicator at the University of Ottawa. Welcome back.
Thank you again for having me.
What's your read on the current situation in Ottawa?
I think, as you put it, we are solidly within the red zone. I don't think we're going to change from that anytime soon, depending what you mean by soon. But we're not going to get worse, I don't think. I think we're doing all the right things to keep ourselves in this zone and maybe even diminish in a couple of weeks.
Okay, we're doing all the right things. Are there any things that you think we're not doing that we should be doing?
Controversially, we may want to consider further closing schools. You know, that's a hot button topic that's going to get a lot of momentum, I know. But what we're seeing in places like Belgium and Germany and other countries where they've kept schools open is they have really suffered under the weight of B117, which seems to have deeper penetration into young people. And we're seeing the movement of the hospitalized population across the world move down to a younger age group. So it seems that the virus is now targeting a slightly younger demographic, and it seems possibly that school transmission is playing a role. Again, it's very controversial, and I know there'll be some pushback on that, but it's something to be considered if we're really serious about getting the numbers down quickly.
How can we effectively address it? What would that realistically look like?
Ideally, if you're looking at this strictly from a disease control perspective, not a mental health perspective, not an economic perspective, not a family dynamic perspective, but simply disease control, you shut everything down and you support, right? You give money to keep people alive and have their economic wherewithal protected. You keep transmission as low as we can while we distribute the vaccines. That's our best chance at keeping B117 under wraps for the moment. What we're seeing here is really a brand new pandemic in some ways. B117 has different features and characteristics than COVID Classic and poses significantly new challenges. So closing things down seems to be the one thing we know to do well that seems to work, at least in the short term, while vaccination does its job.
So one thing that's happening in Ottawa right now, and I don't think this has been clearly communicated, is that only household members are supposed to be sharing a table at a restaurant. But, you know, I've been wondering how effective that's been communicated, because I've had conversations with people that work in restaurants who say, we don't know what we're supposed to be doing. People are calling to book in. Are we supposed to be asking for IDs on the phone? Are we supposed to be making them prove it when they come? All along, Ottawa Public Health has always had the guidance saying, please only go and dine out with members of your household. But we can see, you know, very easily from in practice that people haven't been doing that. Now this is a provincial regulation. Do you think that that is effectively managed right now?
It is not, and I don't know who to blame. It's not the restaurant's fault. It's not their job to police these things. They're not trained for it. They haven't got the resources for it. And frankly, it's uncomfortable to ask people, are you related, before they sit down to eat. So it's unfortunate that that's the way the responsibility has been projected down to the restaurant level. It always falls upon the responsibility of the individual, of those of us who are going out to dine. It's our responsibility to be respectful of these rules. It looks like we're not being respectful, in which case it may fall upon public health to restrict things further if people cannot be responsible here. I don't know what the answer is, except to say that we have to diminish our contacts and we have to keep from interacting with other people for a couple more months while this wave does its job and moves through the population.
I reached out to Ottawa Public Health this morning and I said, what's changed here? Because you've always been recommending that people only dine with their own households, but now this is a requirement in the updated provincial regulations. It says all people who are seated together at a table must be members of the same household, or, you know, caregiver for any member of either household. And I said, who's responsible? OPH said both the restaurant operators and the individuals. Restaurants and retailers are required to actively screen all patrons. And I said, okay, so what's the protocol then for screening? And they said, no, this is the screening, like asking people, have you traveled within the last 14 days? Have you had contact with somebody who was diagnosed with COVID-19? So they're not, as far as I'm aware of here, not responsible for asking people, where do you live, for being kind of, the gatekeeper of the restaurant. Oh, you don't live together? You're not coming in. They're not policing it. And I've reached out to Bylaw to find out if they're policing it. What do you think would make sense?
Well, it's Bylaw's job. It's not the restaurant's job. You know, let's be clear on this. The restaurant, servers and hosts are not empowered or trained to be enforcing local laws and regulations. It's not their job or their training, and it's not an appropriate thing. So I don't know what the right answer is, except to say that Even bylaw probably can't enforce it. How do you prove that two people live together without investigating, without going home with them to see if their stuff is there? I don't know. So this is not an actionable kind of regulation. Again, falls upon the individual citizen to be respectful of the rules, and not to break them. So we have to understand why these rules are in place. They're there to prevent transmission of a hyper-transmissible new virus variant that threatens our healthcare system. And what we're playing with here is the ability to have an open society in a couple of months. We're endangering that very strong probability. So let's not do that. I want to have a good summer. I want to have things open up and stay open at the end of the spring. That's what the plan is. That's what the trajectory is. That doesn't happen if people aren't respectful of the current public health guidance.
I was reading a story in the Ottawa Citizen today about somebody who works from home. She said she doesn't go to restaurants or the gym. She only goes out for essential errands and to the grocery store where she is masked. Based on the public health advice, she thought she was safe, and yet she caught COVID-19. She apparently got the South African variant. So she's worried that perhaps the public health advice isn't keeping up with the reality of our situation, the fact that we have these highly contagious variants and that people could be more at risk. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I've been saying throughout that public health is the art of the possible, and what is possible is determined by what people will tolerate. So what do? Do you say you cannot leave your house at all, that you must wear 6 masks before going to the grocery store, you must go to the grocery store once every 2 weeks? I don't know if people will tolerate that. So you have to ratchet down the regulations based upon the expectation of adherence to the rules. Having said that, the mitigation tools we have, like masking and distancing and staying home, should be sufficient if everyone sticks to them religiously. But sufficient doesn't mean perfect. Mask wearing is not perfect. The vaccines aren't perfect. Distancing isn't perfect. It is not. I'm not surprised to hear that people still get infected while following the rules. Some will. And an increasing number.
But how is that possible? If you're washing your hands, you're wearing a proper mask, you're not going out to places where people are unmasked, like, at a restaurant, people are taking their masks off. At some workout facilities with smaller crowds, they're taking their masks off. You're not going over to someone's house. If you're masked at all times, if you're following the guidelines, how are you getting COVID-19?
A mask is not a spacesuit. It diminishes the probability of transmission. It doesn't reduce it to zero. So there's always going to be a situation where a vanishingly small number of people are still going to be exposed and get it. Same with the vaccination. The vaccination is not perfect protection. A vanishingly small number of people can still transmit. And when this is scaled up to thousands, if not millions of people, that number is going to be higher than we expect. So, and that number gets higher again with the hypertransmissibility of viruses. Remember, we know that COVID is airborne, and airborne viruses transmit much more easily. We have situations in New Zealand where we thought people got it from touching a doorknob, but it wasn't the case. The case was, in fact, they walked by a hotel room and their exhalation lingered long enough for someone to come out of the room and inhale it afterwards. That's how insidious this virus is. And a mask is great protection. It's not perfect. So we have to remember that, which is why we can't play around at the fringes with these rules.
Mayor Jim Watson wants to know why Ottawa is not being included in the pharmacy program. Moments ago, he said Ottawa has clusters of COVID-19 cases that are comparable basically to those in the GTA. There's no reason why we aren't being included in this program at this time, and we urgently need this for our community. What do you think? Should Ottawa be a priority for this program?
I think everywhere should be a priority for the program. I think the program was a pilot program. It's proven it works. So let's take it out of the pilot phase and make it part of the regular program of distributing the vaccine. So Ottawa is a good place for it. We have excellent pharmacies, and we have well-trained pharmacists who are used to giving flu shots, so this is a appropriate place for it. We're seeing in places like Toronto where the pilot projects for the pharmacies aren't in the places where most of the cases are. So that's a failure up front as well. So the pilot phase, I think, should be over. We should now deploy this new strategy across the board, with the caveat, of course, that depends on having sufficient vaccine supply. But yeah, why not? Let's give it to all the pharmacies we can.
Okay, finally, Quebec is recommending just one vaccine dose for people previously infected with COVID-19. Does the science back that decision up?
It does a little bit. I mean, I can't say for sure, I haven't seen the data, but in theory, it should. An infection is like a primary vaccine shot, and a second vaccine shot is a booster. So that's not to say that if you haven't been infected already that you can't get 2 shots. Absolutely you can. It does matter, of course, how severe your infection was, how long ago it was, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not a fan of this guidance overall. I think as a blanket rule, it may miss some people who maybe did not have optimal antibody production from their infection. But in general, in theory, it's grounded in science. But the devil's in the details, and I'd like to see what those details are.
Dr. Deonandan, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.